Welcome to Garden Wise Adventures. My name is Malie, and today it's time for another plant of the week, and this year we're focusing on herbs. I live in Utah, zone 6/7, and it's mid-October, and I wanted to talk about lavender today. Now, you're wondering, maybe lavender should have been talked about earlier in the season, but we've had a very long, hot season. It started to warm up near the end of June and then rocketed straight to the hundreds, and we've had a long season. And this is the latest I've seen our first frost. Now, normally our first fall frost, the average is mid-October, but the last several years we've seen early frosts near the end of September towards the mid-October. Now, our first frost is still not in the forecast, but we are going to start getting into the 30s. Now, the lavender is looking really, really nice right now, and it's actually starting a rebloom. So let's look at lavender, talk about growing it in cooler climates, and tell you what I do with it. Now, as I said, I live in Utah zone 6/7, and we've had some really cold winters in the past. The coldest I've seen it get is -10. I've lived here for 15 years, and the average low temperature is around, I'd say, 5 degrees. So we have moved up to a zone 7. When I first moved here, I wouldn't have said we were anything higher than a zone 5. But I've noticed even a lot of the most diehard people are starting to switch and say at least we're a zone 6. So I call us a zone 6/7. And when I first moved onto this property, I planted a ton of lavender. This is the offspring of one of those lavenders, and this one is most likely a Munstead. Like I said, it's an offspring. It's a seedling of one of the lavenders that I grew, and I remember purchasing Munstead lavender because it was very hardy. We have another one right here that looks a little different, but it is the same type of lavender, but it just gets quite a bit more shade. Right now we're in October, and the sun is setting far more in the south than it has in the past. So right now it's getting a little bit of shade and a little bit of sun. Shade from the green stalk right here, and then the sun is sneaking around it. But this is what it looks like when it doesn't get as much sun as it needs. Here's another seedling of my original varieties. This one is in a little bit more sun normally, but right now because of the time of year and the way the sun is oriented, it is in a little bit more shade. But as you can see, we're getting some new growth from where I cut it back, and we'll talk about how I cut it back in a little bit. And we're getting new flowers. This one over here, because it is typically in more shade, is not getting a ton of new growth, and we don't have any new flowers on it. But this one that gets the most sun, we've got a lot of new growth since I cut them back, and we're getting a rebloom. Now, typically our season is not long enough for us to actually get reblooms, so I'm really, really happy to see this. Now, this over here is on the southwest corner of my property and probably gets the most sun, but this is a completely different variety. It's a really small variety. It's called Wee One. Has a little bit of different scent, and I absolutely love it, and a little bit tighter growth habit. We are getting a little bit of regrowth, but no rebloom. In years past, though, in a little bit cooler summers, I've actually seen it flower all the way through October. So now we're back to this one that's in a little bit of shade. This one does get a little bit more water. Because I try to water my pawpaw a little bit more. My pawpaw needs quite a bit of water. I really made a mistake leaving it in the front yard and then removing the grass from around it. So the plants around this tree are now needing to deal with a bit more water than the rest of the property, just so that I can keep that pawpaw alive. But what has happened is around this plant, we've got seedlings. So this is what I mean by these are seedlings from my original plants. So like I said, this is most likely a Munstead. And if I don't cut it back soon enough, if the flowers stay on the plant long enough to form seeds, I will get these little seedlings all the way around the plant. We've got several right here. We've got some more. We've got another little guy right here. But these are exceptionally easy. There's another one right here. They're very, very easy to dig up and transplant. Now, some years I transplant them, and some years I give them to friends. It'll probably be another 2 years before I decide to start using these seedlings and replace my old lavender. And what I look for is I look inside my plants right here, and you can see new growth down the stems quite a ways. So they are looking pretty good. Let's go look at the wee one and see what that looks like inside. Now these wee one lavenders are probably about 4 or 5 years old. And it looks like they have leaves down the stem also. But if you look way down deep inside, there's a lot of woody stems. And those woody stems are what we're going to talk about next. And I just, as a side note, these are not ones that I have noticed reseed themselves. I don't know if it's a variety that has sterile seeds or how that works, but anyway, these don't seem to reseed themselves. Now, before we get into talking about the woody growth and how I groom my lavender, let's talk a little bit more about varieties. Now, I've grown several different varieties. One of my very favorite ones, but most difficult ones to grow here, was the Provence lavender. Those have really long wands of flowers, and the scent is amazing. They're the ones that they use for perfume in France, and is slightly less hardy than the Munstead. It's a much larger plant, and actually, let's go show you the areas that I had it planted in the past. I don't have it anymore, but let me show you where I had it planted in the past, and talk a little bit about microclimates and how it worked with my lavender. Now this is my front bed. It looks different than it did when I had my Provence lavender. I live on a corner property, and I used to have grass all through the front yard and then just a few planting beds. This right here is a northwest corner, and it's right where the wind hits, the winter winds. You can actually see where I've had to tie this tree. This is a little hazelnut tree. It's a 3-year-old hazelnut tree. I've had to tie that so that it doesn't get blown over in the winds. You can see back there how my medlar is leaning, and you can see how the winds come through. Now the winter winds are really cold. The storms go through right here. And for a while, I tried desperately to grow Provence lavender right in this spot. I thought it looked the best. I had one right here, and then I had one that was planted over in this area because this was the edge of my planting bed. Now I had a couple of trees and a couple of other things that blocked the Provence lavender that was on this side from the cold winter winds, and I never had a problem overwintering the Provence that was on this side of the flower bed. But the Provence lavender that was on this corner, I finally gave up on it because I couldn't get it to live, and I just planted the Munstead. And the cold winter winds were just too cold for it. Another variety of lavender that I grew was one called Alba. It was a white flower, absolutely gorgeous, and one of my favorite scents. Actually, I'm not even sure why I quit growing that one, other than they got old and woody, which is what we're going to talk about next. And I pulled them out, and I never replaced them with white lavender again. But they were very, very hardy. The Munstead is very hardy. I know Hitticoat is hardy. My wee one lavenders are hardy here. But there are certain ones that we can't grow, like the Provence is semi-hardy. When we had our coldest winters, it would always die back. Another one that we cannot grow out here is the Spanish lavender with the little tufts on top. I absolutely love those. I used to grow them in Southern California, and I was very disappointed to find out that it was not hardy enough for here. So depending on the area of the country that you live, there are certain lavenders that may survive and certain that may not. So you will need to do a little bit of research on the variety that you'd like to grow and see exactly how hardy it is. By far, though, the Spanish lavenders are the least hardy. Now, when it comes to maintenance of lavender, I'll see if I can find a video clip that I took a long time ago. This is from a really old video where I showed you how I cut back my lavender with a hedge trimmer because my lavender plants were so huge at that point. But let me show you on these plants how far I had cut them back this year. Now, maybe I'll do a lavender grooming video last year, but I didn't think much about doing it this year. You can see right here some cut stems. These were the flower stems this year, and this is where I cut it back to. You can also see the tips of these have kind of split a little bit. You can kind of see the cut end, and you can see where the new regrowth is coming from. So cutting your lavender plants back makes them more attractive for the winter because these will be evergreen all winter long. This is another reason I love lavender. So it does stay evergreen all winter long. And it makes it look a lot tidier. So I cut the flowers back, and I usually cut back about 1 inch of green growth. Now, the thing that you do not want to do to lavender is to cut back where all that wood is. So I think safely I could probably cut this branch back to here, where my thumb is, but if I take it down to that woody area, it's not going to grow back. Now, if I wait later in the year to cut back my lavender, I think I cut these all back in July, But if I wait later in the year and cut them back in August or September, or even wait until fall to cut them back, this is what they look like. They don't get a ton of new regrowth, and they just look like this all winter long. So the time of year that you cut them back doesn't matter as much. I cut them back earlier because I don't like to look at the dead flower stems. I like a neat, tidy looking garden. You could even actually wait until spring to cut them back, but you just have an ugly mess to look at. Now, a lot of people like to leave their plants up all winter long for the insects. I can tell you that I've never left any of my plants up over the winter, and every year the more flowers that I plant, and especially the more native type flowers I plant, the more pollinators that I have. They are finding places to nest even though I cut all of my plants back. But it's definitely a personal preference. Everybody gets to do it the way they want. But I definitely cut my lavender back so it looks better over the winter. Now, I did say don't cut back into the wood, but if you watch Laura from Garden Answer, who is one of my favorite YouTube creators, she talks about how from the very beginning, the very first year, she cuts all of her lavender back to a couple of inches tall. And because she does that every year, her lavender does not have a chance to get woody. Now, I have thought about doing that, and for some reason I didn't, so I just let my lavender continue to get bigger and bigger, woodier and woodier, and when it finally gets to the point where I just don't like the way it looks anymore, I pull it out and transplant the seedlings that are growing around the bases. So I haven't had to actually purchase lavender since, I think the last time I purchased lavender was 2010, other than the wee ones. The wee ones I purchased 5 years ago. Now, lavender is very, very useful. If you look at medicinal uses of lavender, there's a ton of medicinal uses. But as I've said in many of my other videos, I don't cover medicinal uses of plants in my videos because I'm not an expert on that. But one thing that I do that I would love to share is, well, I don't do it now because I don't have nylon stockings anymore. But when I used to have nylon stockings, I would save the old ones, cut off the feet part of them, and I would stuff them with lavender and put those in my bath, and it would turn the bath water this gorgeous blue color. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of different types of bags that you could use, that, mesh bags that you could use that would accomplish the same thing as nylon stockings, but that is one of my favorite ways to use it. You can make lavender wands, for scent. I mean, there's a lot of different things. There's a lot of medicinal uses. Now, for cooking, you could take the dried flowers and use those in baking and use them for a flavoring. So there's a lot of different ways to use lavender. My favorite use for lavender is to bring in the pollinators. The pollinators absolutely love the flowers when they're in bloom, and it's a definite mood booster for me to be able to walk through the garden even when they're not in flower, pick just a sprig of them and have that to smell while I'm running around looking at plants. Lavender is an amazing plant, and it's one plant that my garden will never be without. Now, I would love to hear where in the country that you live and what types of lavender are your favorite and what types grow where you live and what you do to use it. Now, I almost forgot. We did talk about hardiness. Let's talk about the conditions that lavender likes. Lavender is very particular about its conditions. They need full sun. They need well-draining soil. If you live in an area that has heavy clay, try mixing in some sand. Try different methods to help your soil drain a little bit better. If you can't do that, you can always plant them in raised beds. Now, one caveat about planting them in raised beds is lavender does not like rich soil. They don't like fertilizer at all. They don't like compost. You can mulch them, but be very careful that you're not mulching them every year with a ton of compost because they don't really like a lot of nutrients. They need a really lean soil. If you give them too many nutrients, you get soft, wimpy growth, and they die off over the winter a lot faster. So to stay hardy and to stay a nice compact plant with beautiful growth, they need a lean soil. The other thing that they need is a good deep soak once every week to 2 weeks. They don't like a lot of water. The roots will rot out very, very easily. So if you live in an area like I do here in Utah with an arid climate and lean soil, lavenders grow like crazy and they absolutely love it. So hopefully this video has been helpful for you. If it has been helpful, I hope you like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and go have a wonderful garden adventure.